Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for today's program, or I guess I should say tonight's program, the Night of Shamus, celebrating the best in detective fiction. And it is my honor to introduce tonight's moderator, Anjili Babbar. So Anjili, the floor is yours. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, and thanks everyone for coming out to see us so we can honor these amazing writers. I just want to introduce them all, and then I'll have them tell you a little bit about their series, and then we'll get into some questions. So J.R. Sanders lives in Southern California with his wife, Rose, and their rescue dogs, Ruby and Marlowe. A former police officer and private investigator, J.R.'s nonfiction articles appear in such magazines as Law and Order and Wild West. His nonfiction books cover topics as diverse as Southern California apple farms and Old West lawmen killed in the line of duty. His first Nate Ross novel, Stardust Trail, was a 2021 Spur Award finalist for Best Historical Novel and Silver Falchion Award finalist for Best Investigator. Dead Bang Fall, the second of 4 Nate Ross novels, was the 2023 Shamus Award winner for Best Paperback PI Novel. Welcome, JR. Secondly, Liz Milliron lives in Pittsburgh with her son and a very spoiled retired racer greyhound, who we've heard we will probably hear from at some point in the night. She's a recovering technical writer, a past president of the Pittsburgh chapter of Sisters in Crime, and the current vice president. And she's a national Sisters in Crime education liaison. She's also a member of Pen Writers, International Thriller Writers, and the Historical Novel Society. Her short fiction has appeared in several anthologies. She is the author of the Laurel Highlands Mysteries, 7 titles in that series, and the Homefront Mysteries, both with Level Best Books. The Lies We Live, the 6th Homefront Mystery, is out February 4th, 2024. The Truth We Hide, the 5th Homefront Mystery, was nominated for the 2024 Shamus Award for Best Paperback PI Novel. And last but not least, Gabriel Valjan is the author of The Company Files and the Shane Cleary Mysteries with Level Best Books. He has been nominated for the Agatha, Anthony, Derringer, and Silver Falchion Awards. Gabriel is a member of the Historical Novel Society, International Thriller Writers, Mystery Writers of America, and Sisters in Crime. He lives in Boston and answers to a tuxedo cat named Munchkin. I can confirm this, he does. He received the 2021 Macavity Award for Best Short Story. Liar's Dice, the 4th Shane Cleary mystery, was the 2024 Shamus Award winner for Best Paperback PI Novel. And lastly, my name is Anjil Babbar. I'm going to be your moderator tonight. I am a lecturer of humanities at Boston University. I've published on too many things, ranging from Irish crime fiction to representations of Irish folklore in popular culture, and my recent book, Finders, Justice, Faith, and Identity in Irish Crime Fiction, from Syracuse University Press, won the 2024 Agatha and Anthony Awards for Best Critical and Nonfiction, and was nominated for the Anthony Award. So, I just want to say congratulations to all of you on your Shamus Awards and nominations. And before we start with the questions, could each of you tell us a little about your Shamus novel and the broader series that it comes from?
Who wants
Liz,
to go first?
You want to start, Liz?
Sure. So the book that was nominated this year for the Shamus was The Truth We Hide, which you can see mine backwards. You can see the cover over my shoulder, and I think I've screwed up my Bible. It's the 4th in the Homefront Mysteries. This particular book is the first that I would actually call a PI novel in this series, where Betty is embarking on her own professional investigation agency. Up until now, she has been kind of an amateur sleuth, where she is hired to clear a man who is accused of espionage. The series broader, it's set in the early 1940s, World War II. Betty is my Rosie the Riveter turned Sam Spade. She started out as working at the Bell Aircraft Factory, making P-39 aircraft, but she has transitioned in her life to being a private investigator and is finding it very interesting.
I guess I'll go next. So Liar's Dice, which won the Shamus Award, is the fourth in the Shane Cleary series. There are 5 books out there. So this particular installment finds Shane, basically he's hired out by a mob boss to find a missing nephew. And this also coincides with a visit from one of his buddies from Vietnam. And at that particular time, a homeless advocate and Vietnam veteran is found frozen to death on the Boston Common. So Shane is particularly interested in that. So while he's dealing with the trying to find the missing nephew, he's sort of exploring what happened to this guy on the Common. And when he gets this visit from a friend of his from Vietnam, it kind of brings a lot of things home. Now, his friend is not exactly forthcoming about why he needs Shane's help, but the guy's presence and the whole issue of Vietnam brings up a little bit of tension between Shane and his girlfriend, Bonnie. So that's kind of a continuing storyline with their relationship. He's a PI, she's a lawyer. So as he investigates this mystery about the missing nephew, he realizes that he's walking into a war within the mafia between New York and Boston over narcotics. And that also it also brings in the Calabrian mafia in Canada. And Shane comes up against a new nemesis who is a Irish gangster. Now, Shane himself is Irish, so that brings up an interesting slice of Boston history. So that's it in a nutshell. And we'll go to JR.
Well, my main character, Nate Ross, is a private eye operating in Los Angeles in the late 1930s. He's a former LA County deputy sheriff who was forced out after testifying against a group of corrupt officers, both Sheriff's Department and LAPD. So needless to say, he's not popular with the law enforcement element in Los Angeles, which can be problematic in his work. He's also struggling to escape the shadow of his father, who was also with the Sheriff's Department, but was actually himself a corrupt cop. And he disowned Nate after his testimony for betraying the Brotherhood. So some family issues there. And the father later committed suicide. Dead Bang Fall, the second in the series, finds Nate dealing with some ghosts from his past. He just misses witnessing a murder, a back alley murder, and the suspect, who he sees fleeing, happens to be one of the officers that Nate's testimony had helped send to prison 5 years earlier, a former friend and co-worker named Tommy Ronan. Things become more complicated for Nate, and Tommy approaches him, insisting that he's innocent, presenting good evidence that he's innocent, convinces Nate to help him, and then promptly disappears again. So then Nate's mission becomes to find the real killers, to find Tommy, to protect Tommy, because these people are still trying to kill him. And this brings him into the path of a pair of rolling assassins, exposes a film piracy ring, and ultimately ends up in a rescue mission on a floating casino ship off the coast of Santa Monica. Meanwhile, a couple of flashbacks within the story deal with how Nate originally became aware of the corrupt officers in the department and what he did with that information.
I mean, doesn't everything just end with a floating casino? Like, it's 2024. So some of my questions are for all of you, and some of them are geared specifically to each of you, but I'm going to start with one for all of you. The Shamus Award recognizes outstanding achievement in private eye fiction. a subgenre of crime fiction people sometimes mistakenly assume is steeped in tropes and not original. Every time I say private eye fiction to my students, they're like, oh, the trench coat guys. Could each of you explain what drew you to PI fiction in particular, and how contemporary PI fiction writers such as yourselves produce deeply original work within the context of this form? Maybe we can keep the same order we had last time, if you don't mind going first, Liz.
Don't mind at all. Okay, so as I alluded to when I started my introduction, I actually did not set out to write a private investigator. It kind of happened by accident, which I always envisioned this series as Betty as more of a amateur sleuth. It was tradition. She was going to work her job at Bell Aircraft and just investigate on the side. And when I reached the end of book 3, I realized that wasn't going to work anymore. Mainly because you can't work an 8-hour job, 8-hour a day job 6 days a week and also investigate crime. It, you usually when you read when you read stories of people, women who actually any character that has an amateur sleuth, if they have a job, they either work for themselves or they own their own business, or there's some way that they can take time off. There was no time off if you're working in war manufacturing in World War II. So this was not going to be a viable path. So I pivoted and said, well, then she's just going to get her private eye license. She's going to, this is what she thinks she's wanted to do. She's a huge movie buff. She's a Sam Spade, Philip Marlowe fan, that she always thought, hey, I could do this. This would be really cool. So she does. So, and she opens up her own investigative agency, which is the first in The Truth We Hide. So I don't know that I was drawn to it as much as I fell into it. That said, I enjoy it. My other series that I write is police procedural, which is very different because when you write a police officer, unless you're going to write a rogue cop, he's going to stay in the rules. I get to have fun with Betty because there are rules, but not to the same extent. Like she can pick a lock on somebody, and as long as she doesn't get caught, it's okay. So I'm having a lot of fun with it. And I think we all have the, like the 40s movies with Sam Spade or the books, or, we've got that, as you say, the trench coat guys. But I think, at least for me, I'm working with a woman in the 40s, and that automatically is different right there. She's not really a rogue. She's not doing this because she thinks the police are corrupt, or because she doesn't think the system works. So I don't really touch, that's not a motivation for her, which it is with some private eyes. Sometimes you get into that, like JR mentioned, he's had police corruption, and that's completely and totally fine. But I haven't done that. And I think, and I've read, all of us here, there's a depth to modern PI fiction, and you can go back to Sarah Paretsky's V.I. Warshawski with us. There's a depth that is new. These are not just men and women pounding the hard streets. There's no character development. There's no background. These are well-rounded characters. You see them with their struggles and their successes. And we're also not afraid to shy into the really, and I won't jump on this because I know you had a question about it, like really deep issues, like, not just skimming the top. These are real things that people care about, and we're not afraid to get our hands dirty, so to speak.
Okay, I guess I'll jump in. I never thought I'd see the day where the 70s would be considered historical fiction, but it is, and I grew up in the 70s. I was a child, and I have to say that one of the reasons why I ended up starting writing a Shane Cleary series and set it in the 70s was that I was actually, from talking to other readers, and I was actually quite shocked at how much people don't know the 70s. I mean, they know cliches, disco, polyester, bad movies and whatnot, but they don't know the actual history. And I always thought of the 70s as kind of a very much a turning point in American history, because the 60s had its idealism, it had a lot of disruption, you had major seismic shifts in society with civil rights, certainly with Vietnam. And in the 70s, it felt like the air came out of the tires. People lost their idealism. People became more cynical. Now, as a kid in the 70s, even though I write Shane in Boston, I'm originally from the New York, New Jersey area. And one of the things I came to realize was that when you grow up in an environment or a decade that is endemically corrupt or systemically corrupt, you don't question it. It's part of your reality. And I thought, that was kind of interesting that it changed or shaped my moral view of things. I don't see things in black and white. I see things in terms of very gray. So that's why I can create a mafia character in my series who actually has more morality, more morals than the cops. Now, as I said, with this being historical fiction, it's no lie that the 70s were very corrupt, particularly with the police, with politics, and certainly in Boston, as I came to learn. Boston was one of the last cities to be segregated. If you know anything about the city in the early 70s, there was a busing crisis that turned into violence. People were trying to block their kids from going to neighborhoods. They were attacking other people. I mean, it was a very, very tumultuous time. And there were incidents along the way where the city almost went into a lockdown. Cops were out in riot gear. Whether it's a busing crisis or in my, I think, third book, Hush Hush, I covered a murder that actually happened. I fictionalized it, but there was a murder in the combat zone here in Boston where a Harvard student was stabbed to death. And as I said, I fictionalized the story, but that particular murder changed jury selection in the United States. And the city almost went into full riot mode because of that particular murder. But one of the things I want to say, though, is that when you're looking at corruption, you have to make a choice, and you could either become cynical or you can become paranoid. And the 70s, I think, had a lot of paranoia. If you look at the films, you see conspiracy theory, you see a lot of corruption with politicians, different stories. So when I decided to write Shane, I wanted to make the choice that I wanted to have him stand out, because when you're writing about Boston, it's you can't avoid Robert Parker and you can't avoid Dennis Lehane. Those are the two writers about Boston that immediately come to mind. I also wanted to change the tropes a little bit. Shane is a very intelligent person, very literate. He's not an alcoholic. He's not somebody with anger management issues. He is somebody who is level-headed, but I think he also, like me, can see the gray and navigate the system and try to come to some sense of solving the case at hand and getting justice for his clients. I hope that answers the question.
Well, as far as Nate Ross, he's definitely one of the trench coat guys. And personally, I enjoy some of the tropes of fiction, especially the period I'm writing in. It's almost unavoidable. But the response I've had, the readers I've heard from, seem to like some of the tropes. And if the critics don't, when's the last time a critic bought a book? But I enjoy some of the tropes, you know, the CD bars, the bourbon bottle in the desk drawer, that kind of thing. So rather than avoid them altogether, I try to make the most of them, hopefully dust them off, make them a little fresh. Nate, for instance, it's sort of a trope that, you know, the ex-cop character was left his job because of some sort of misconduct or being brutal, getting in some sort of a jam. In Nate's case, he was driven out, ironically, because he was honest. He was more honest than the people he worked with, than the people he worked for. And again, ironically, he happens to be the son of probably the most corrupt cop in the whole region. So sometimes if I read a book, you know, a private eye novel set in the period, I feel almost a little cheated if I don't see some of those tropes. But as far as PI fiction, how I came to it, I've always been a fan. When I was 7, 8 years old, I used to swipe my brother's Mike Shane novels. My mother would have been horrified at that. Also grew up reading Westerns. I'm a lifelong fan of Westerns. I've done some Western writing in the past. And it's always been interesting to me to see how similar, in a lot of ways, Western fiction and private eye fiction is. Just down to the nuts and bolts, they both tend to be good guys versus bad guys stories, where the bad guys have all the power and they're causing misery to undeserving people. And it's up to a lone hero to stand up against them and to set things right. It fascinates me to look at movies like The Magnificent Seven, you know, classic Westerns, Clint Eastwood's spaghetti Westerns, and to know that those movies were inspired by Akira Kurosawa's samurai pictures, which were in turn inspired by Dashiell Hammett, particularly Red Harvest. And further, that Red Harvest has quite a few elements of Hammett's own story, Corkscrew, which is very much a Western story.
I just want to say, I didn't mean to insult the tropes. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm actually sitting under a picture of Mr. Hammett. So, I just meant to say that it's more than just the tropes. It's more than the tropes, but I do love the tropes myself. You've all touched on corruption. Liz, you said you you don't incorporate it quite so much, but all three of you have mentioned it. Before I ask you specific questions about your books individually, can you mention briefly the way that institutional corruption plays out in novels by some other writers you admire? Obviously, Mr. Hammett's looming, but maybe you have some other favorites. Liz, you want to start?
Oh, yes, I'll start. I haven't read as much PI fiction most recently, but I think JR and Gabriel have great examples. I mean, I love the Shane Clary series, and I love particularly because, as he said, some of his bad guys have better morals than the good guys. And I always like it when the corruption isn't just so pat. Like, here's the like, you don't check the box, right? Like, here's your corrupt cop and here's your corrupt attorney, and here. I like it when you can twist it a little bit and the people maybe you don't expect to be corrupt don't have, the greatest of motives, I think. I'm trying to remember. I do remember I read a few V.I. Warshawski novels, but it was so long ago and my brain is, of course, gone. But actually, I think we've got two really good examples just right here in this webinar for me.
Gabriel, you can jump in?
I just want to say, like, in some of the PI stories that I've read before, I mean, obviously you deal with Dashiell Hammett, like Red Harvest was based on, apocryphally or allegedly, it was based on his time as a Pinkerton. So he's working for these clients that are big business, and the violence is very, very visceral. Um, then if you look at Hammett's Continental Op, who we know, as far as I can remember, we never know his name. He just kind of moves through the universe. He's this big hulking, on the edge, violent person. Now, the other people I've read, when I look at Lou Archer, or you look at some of the crime stories of, let's see here, James Cain, you get into very, very dark territory. Although with Cain, it's more situational, your everyday person. But at the same time, you're seeing a world where businesses, the mayor, any person that you're interacting with along the way, they're kind of shady. They all have their motives. And one of the things that, when I was reading a lot of mystery genre, I did read cozies. They kind of sanitize the violence, put it off screen, but it's there. People look at Agatha Christie as somebody who's cozy, but she actually wrote a lot of dark material. But what I took from Agatha was the thinking part, thinking with the clues, working your way through it, and I guess maybe in a procedural way. But when I did Shane, one of the things I wanted to do that made him different was I looked at Hammett and I could see the 70s being like the world of Hammett, where things are rough. A cop is moving a suspect. Oops, he fell down the flight of stairs. Oops, an accident happens. He hit his head, or they plant a gun, or something horrible happens. Whereas when you look at somebody like Chandler's Marlowe, he is philosophical, but he's kind of cynical. But I enjoyed the realism that I got from Hammett, but I enjoyed the language, the use of language to create the both of them. Where the only other difference I would say, those two authors, I tried to present women in a more positive light, in a more active way. My Bonnie is an intelligent woman. She's a lawyer. She's dealing with the misogyny and the sexism of the legal profession. And of course, 1970s Boston. Women in Chandler, they tend to be, nymphettes or femme fatales. With Hammett, I guess they're more of a femme fatale. Kind of, you can make the argument they were a little bit more negative. But the whole universe in both detectives are very, very stark, corrupt, violent, if not directly or off screen. Oops.
JR, do you want to jump in?
Sure.
I'll argue with you someday about that depiction of women in Hammett. Go ahead, JR.
Well, I'm with Liz on this. I'm a Shane Cleary fan for a lot of the same reasons. In terms of modern writers, anything Walter Mosley writes, there's all sorts of corruption everywhere you turn. To go back a lot further, and Gabriel already mentioned the grandfather or the godfather, maybe it's more appropriate, of hard-boiled detective fiction, Chandler. Nearly anything you read of Chandler touches on corruption in some form, whether it's the police and courts, whether it's Hollywood was a big topic, the media. One of my favorite Chandler stories is Spanish Blood, and it's a very interesting departure, I think, because the main character is not a private eye. He's a cop. He's working within the system. But at the same time, in investigating the murder of a friend, he's working around the system because the system is corrupt. His own department's colluding with a crooked political machine. And so he has to navigate those waters to come to the truth and to find some justice for his friend. Much of The Big Sleep, To Stay with Chandler, also revolves around the killing of a corrupt businessman, a bookstore owner who's, owns what looks like a respectable rare book dealership, but he's actually a backroom pornographer.
Thanks, guys. Gabriel, obviously
Yes.
the Shane Cleary series, amazing enough that when I'm asking for references, people are referencing you. It's a wonderful series for anyone who hasn't read it. But you talked a little bit about this already, but I want to ask a really specific question about it. It's set in Boston in the 70s, and it addresses, as you said, this particular novel addresses a number of issues like racism, reticent desegregation, police corruption, and effectively suggests, as we've mentioned, that the mafia at the time, some of the mafia members in particular who are Shane's clients, had a better code of conduct than the police. So my specific question about this is, under these kind of circumstances, we talk a lot about the hard-boiled detective code. How does Shane decide where his loyalties lie and what his own code should look like?
I think it's a great question because in the context I created for Shane, working with the mafia, you would think that he's making a deal with the devil to get a paycheck. And as I tried to show the reader, they do have the mafia at that time had a code of ethics. In Liar's Dice in particular, one of the issues that comes up is there is a ensuing drug war that is coming up, and this was actually based on real events in the early 70s. And I guess for in terms of a touchstone for people to access that is, if you ever seen the movie The Godfather, the whole point of Don Corleone turning away Salazzo the Turk and one of the other families is that he does not want his family, his crime family, involved in the narcotics trade. Now, the argument is that he rejects it because he considers it a dirty business. And in the movie, the logic is, if you're an adult and you decide to get into prostitution as a customer, or you decide to go gamble and, owe money to somebody, that's an adult decision. Whereas he felt that with narcotics, yes, you can be an adult, but the point is you're bringing it into an environment where maybe kids can get access to it. And that's what he felt was immoral. He felt that it was dirty. Now, one of the things that you see in the PI canon is that private detectives build up a network. And one of the things that they can do is, because they're not law enforcement, they don't have to abide by all the laws and the rules. They can kind of skate or be a little bit gray with them. And essentially a PI can tap into that network. They also can, I guess you would say, they can walk between two worlds. They can go into the criminal world, maybe people that they know. Obviously, in Shane's case, he does know that element, but also as a former cop, he knows what the law is and what you can or can't do. But he also knows the landscape as somebody who upheld the law, and now as somebody who is kind of like a freelancer who basically he knows everybody. And one of the things that you see in the Shane Cleary series is that network. He knows the people who own the bars. He knows people that are gay. One of his friends on the police force is closeted, so he becomes a resource, to access a different part of Boston that most people don't see. And I'm hoping that when people read the series, what they're seeing is life in the 70s. And what I'm hoping is just by seeing it that they realize life was very different. We shouldn't be so quick to be nostalgic about the past because not everything was great. It was a horrible time for people of color, a horrible time, pretty bad time for people that were LGBT, and also too, for women. So by working these different venues, he can go to places where cops are afraid to go to, but at the same time, when he's dealing with the mafia, he's very business oriented with them. He's not profiting from what they're doing. He's certainly not naive about where their criminal activities, but there is a code and an honor system between his communication with Mr. B, who is the mafia don. Now, are they necessarily telling each other everything honestly all the time? No, but there's reasons for that. So I'm hoping that when you see Shane act, he is acting from a moral core. He doesn't want to hurt anybody. If you look at a lot of I noticed that a lot of the PIs that you see in the 70s, they almost were very rough and tumble, borderline vigilantes. I think of Mike Hammer, for example. But at the same time, I think the best way for people to understand the 70s is maybe you need to see some films to understand how bad the cops were. You can look at Serpico, you can look at Prince of the City, and you can kind of see that Shane is his own guy. He does have to make difficult decisions, and there are times where it causes some problems. He doesn't want to talk about his job or things because his girlfriend's a lawyer, and that could be a conflict of interest. But the point is, he does tread the line, and he tries to do the right thing.
Thank you. Yeah, you mentioned the time period being difficult for the LGBTQ community, and Liz, obviously this is something that becomes really important in your book. This was really interesting to me because I teach ethics, and one of the things that we talk about a lot is, how to contend with a system of rules if the laws themselves are bad, right? So my question for you, The Truth We Hide is set in the 1940s and homosexuality is illegal. And your detective Betty has to confront her own feelings about that in order to proceed with her case. Are there times when a PI has to make judgments about good and bad laws and standards? And can you address how Betty resolves this? Because clearly it's the law, but it's also her upbringing she's contending with.
Yeah, this was a really great question. So when I started the series, she's also very young. I think she's only 19. And I deliberately chose that because she's moved from childhood to adulthood, and now it's her opportunity to find out who is she? Like, what does she believe? Her entire life, she's Catholic. She's been told, here's the set of rules from the church. Here's the set of rules from society. She's just followed it. But now that she's taken on this, first when she entered the workforce, and now that she's decided to be an investigator, it's really, she's finding I put her in situations where she is going to come up against something that's completely different than what she's been told her entire life. Where she can't just, and she needs to make this decision. Is she going to simply accept being spoon-fed what she's been told, or will she be able to, be like, no, that's not actually really quite the case. So every book I try to, she's in that process of discovery. She's in that, and there are people who help her. And then there's, because she is young, she has a great relationship with her father, who's very down to earth and really pushes her instead of giving her an answer. It's like, well, think about it. You know, you're an adult, you're an intelligent person. Think about it. What would you know, where do you go with this? She's got a very good relationship with a homicide detective who's kind of her mentor. That was another difference, by the way, that I did very consciously with this series. The PI is not in contention with the police. She's, you know, working there. And in this book in particular, when it turns out that her client is a closeted homosexual, her first reaction is like, well, I can't do this. You know, here's what the church tells me, and here's what, you know, society tells me it is illegal. And her cop friend, her mentor, says almost pulls an almost Harry Bosch type thing where he admits, yeah, there are people on the police force who would probably let this murder go unsolved because they don't care about this person. Like, you know, he's a throwaway. And Sam McKinnon basically tells her, look, either the rules apply to everybody or they don't apply to anybody. You know, we need to care about every murderer. And this is why I will continue to do this, even if it might get me on, you know, get some of my coworkers upset with me. And finally, for Betty, ironically, it's her Catholic faith where she looks at it and she cannot reconcile treating somebody poorly with the commandment, love one another. And I think there's a line in this book where she sees this man and she knows he's been a good brother and he's been a patriot and he's a good worker and he's been a good friend, where she says, maybe who you love isn't as important as who you are. And it's really just a process of getting to know people and questioning all those things that she's been told, and her decision, do I want to be that person that just because everybody's told me to be it, or am I going to make my own decision? Am I going to decide for myself, no, this is wrong. And even though everybody tells me that I'm wrong, I know in my heart that this is what I need to do. And it's a process of becoming for her.
Thank you. JR, speaking of trying to come to conclusions about what one thinks within the context of kind of a messy situation, you're, as you mentioned, Nate Ross in this book, who's been ousted from the police, but not for, you know, the sort of Jack Taylor kind of reason of punching somebody or something like that, but because he's exposed the corruption of some of his fellow officers. So in this novel, Dead Bang Fall, as you mentioned, he's hired by one of these same officers, and this fellow tells him he's been falsely accused of murder. Now, interestingly, Nate agrees to take this case, okay, even though this is a person with whom he's had a contentious relationship, and he continues to pursue this case after the client disappears. So I wondered if you could talk about how these different layers of corruption play out in your novels. I mean, we talked a little bit about corruption, but this is like competing corruption, the corrupt cop, and, you know, and then, you know, the false accusation of the corrupt cop. Oh, I hope I didn't give anything. Okay, sorry. But how does Nate find his way to the truth despite that?
I guess the most obvious layer of corruption in the novel is these cops who've been sent to prison, excuse me, 5 years earlier for committing burglaries and selling all stolen goods. So Nate's dilemma in the past, in the flashback in the book, is what to do with that information once he becomes aware of it. He knows that he can't take it to his own department because of corruption. He knows that he can't take it to the LA police because their officers are involved in this also. And there's corruption within their ranks. So he ends up making the decision to take it directly to the district attorney. And there's a little irony in that he takes it to District Attorney Buron Fitz, who is a real life person from LA history, former one-time Lieutenant Governor of California and later a DA. And ironic in that Fitz himself was more than once investigated for corruption in his office and personal corruption. In the modern story, or the 1939 portion of the novel, Nate's dealing with trying first to find this friend, Tommy, or this former friend who's gone on the run, trying to keep him safe from these people who are trying to kill him and trying to prove him innocent. And meanwhile, the police are doing what they do to bring Tommy in. They're convinced that he's guilty. So Nate ends up spending a lot of time circumventing the police, trying to work around them, trying to shortcut them, trying to get there first. Because he's determined, even though he's got this bad history with Tommy, he believes in his innocence. And so, in his view, the right thing to do is to prove the man innocent and to find the guilty party. In the next book, there's a little different sort of corruption involved. The next book in the series is called Bring the Night. And in that, Nate's investigating an apparent suicide that almost immediately he decides it's not a suicide, it's a murder. But the police have been forced by political pressure to write it off, to close the books on it as a suicide. So in this novel, he's actually working more or less on the same side as the police. In fact, he gets rare cooperation from the police because even though they're working within this corrupt system, some of them are a little less corrupt and are trying to do the right thing. And so Nate uses that connection and does his best to work alongside them to try and overcome greater corruption, I guess you would say. And in some cases, within all the novels, Nate's not above using some of the corruption for his own benefit or his client's benefit. He'll take information from a crook that the cops have beaten the information out of if it serves his need. He'll use a juice badge, an honorary badge that they were given out today to celebrities and political bigwigs as sort of a get out of jail free card. He'll use that if he has to. He buys favors from the coroner for a box of cigars. He'll bribe information if he needs to. He's not above using, some ethically questionable means if he's in quest of what he sees as a moral good.
Thank you so much. I'm resisting the temptation to say, but who doesn't buy favors with cigars? So I had a couple other questions, but I want to be mindful because there's only about 9 minutes left, and we do want to have at least a few minutes to get some questions in. So can you guys just briefly say what's next for each of you and where readers can follow you?
Sure, we'll just keep the party rolling. So in February, the 6th book in the Homefront Mysteries is coming out. It's called The Lies We Live. It is the 6th one in the series. It is the one my critique group said is a sea change for Betty. It's a big change for her and what she's going to do with her life, what the decisions that she's going to take. So that's the very next thing. And anybody who wants to connect with me should go to, it's backwards. If you can see my website up there, lizmilliron.com. It has all my links to my social media, but most importantly, you'll get a pop-up form to my newsletter. And I really do encourage you to subscribe because that's where you're going to get the targeted information.
Okay, keeping with the order, next thing up for me is I am working on the 4th Company Files, which is a series about the early days of the CIA. The 4th book will be coming out, I believe, in the summer, so I'm working on that. I have drafted a 6 Shane Cleary, so I have that in the hopper. In terms of connecting to me, I am on Instagram, so it'd be my first and last name run together. I have recently left Twitter for Blue Sky. I cannot recite the address off the top of my head, but if you search for me, you can find me there. Begin with G, and then my last name, Valjan. And I also have a website, GabrielValjan.com. You can find me there. Reach out to me. I try to be good about responding to emails. Thank you.
I just had a release a couple of months ago, the fourth Nate Ross, A Killing Way. And I'm currently working on the fifth one. It's due out, I believe, in mid-October. No title is yet. You can find me at my website, jrsanders.com. It has all my social media links. And on Facebook, I'm virtually impossible to avoid.
Do we want to take some questions? I think Robert already answered the first question. So there's another question in here. Does anybody have assessments? It's a good question on the character of on Ian Rankin's character, John Rebus, sort of a very classic detective there.
Well, it's very interesting. So I did, one of my Sisters in Crime chapter members, he's actually a man, he did a very interesting presentation on the ethics of detectives. And he basically, any detective, whether you're a PI, a cop, or, you know, an amateur, and he puts them into three moral buckets. You're either a moralist, a pragmatist, or a rogue. With the moralists being the ones who are completely within the lines, they do not break the rules. The pragmatists being like, they're mostly within the rules, but if they have to put a toe over the line, you know, violence when absolutely necessary, but not as a first result. And a rogue as screw the lines, use violence whenever you feel like it. The most important thing is you get the job done. And using that metric, I would, from based on what I've read, and I certainly haven't read all of Mr. Rankin's novels, I would very definitely categorize Rebus as a rogue. I believe he's a detective. He's on the police, but he's not. He has no bones about just rubbing out the line when he feels it's necessary and doing whatever he thinks is necessary to get the job done. Which has its attractions for a while, but I don't know. After a while, I start to ask questions about rogues. They might be lovable, but
I put this in the chat, but I just wanted to say that article is by William Gormley,
yes,
who's a former
yeah.
professor at Georgetown. And it really is, in fact, I just saw it last week. It's a fantastic article. And Bill himself is also a crime fiction writer. Do
Yes.
JR or Gabriel, do either one of you want to jump in? I don't see any other questions. Does anybody have another question?
Unfortunately, I'm not that familiar with Ian's. I mean, I've read some of it, but I don't have a full sense of the series, so I don't feel like I can really weigh in that much on it. And I also find it challenging just trying to understand the British legal process, the British law enforcement. So I have to get my head around that sometimes.
I'm a little bit the same boat. I haven't read a whole lot of Ian Rankin stuff, but I'm sort of with Liz on rogues. Nate Ross, I guess, would fall into the pragmatist category, so I don't think he would get along with rogues. But yeah, I found the stuff that I did read of Ian Rankin's, I found to be sort of I guess, almost a British Jack Reacher sort of character.
Yes, that's a very good description. By the way, Gabriel, I would also consider Shane more of a pragmatist, which is where I think some of the best characters live, is especially PI characters, that they're pragmatists.
Do we have any more questions? Because if not, I think we're gonna wrap up. Last chance to ask a question from these brilliant authors. Okay, so I just want to say thank you all for coming out. Thanks for coming out to celebrate these authors. It's an impressive award, and I think you know, we need to thank the people who are doing the writing that keeps us entertained and keeps us thinking. So Liz, JR, and Gabriel, thank you. And I want to thank Robert also for hosting us and giving us a chance to talk to you all.
Yes, thank you for the invitation. This has been fabulous.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you for moderating, Anjali.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night.
Good
Night.
night.
Bye.
Thank you.